another thing about Ghost of the Badlands was it was like an experiment in almost narrative chiaroscuro, where it was like, how little can I tell the reader and have them finish the thought for me?
Getting back to the Apocrypha for a second. So you like Bell and the Dragon. How did you put it? The grandioseness of the scriptures and everything.
Yeah, like written not mythic because it's not, but written in like a sweeping kind of mythic or epic kind of style. That's the kind of stuff I love. That I love just the style of that. That's why I like the Book of Daniel. I love the Book of Jonah for that reason. You know, that kind of style of writing.
So and you write a lot of stuff like that. I got my my Long Midnight right here.
Hey,
I was gonna get out my Ghost of the Badlands, but unfortunately my son stole it from me. He's reading it right now. So
nice. It's behind me. So
so how much of that gets into your writing? Like how much of the, whether it be theological implications, obviously Ghost of the Badlands is heavily theological. It's basically the conversion of St. Paul.
Yeah.
But how much of that is intentional? How much of that is actually something that just kind of finds its way as you're working the story out? You know, how much is that?
Yeah, it was wild. I have never stepped into a story trying to direct it in a theological direction. Like it your morality, if you are writing in a sincere way, and as a Christian, if you have made yourself available to the Spirit that gave you rise, if you are not intruding upon the creative province of God, it's just naturally your morality and your Christian nature is going to find its way into your stories in little sort of imperceptible ways. So probably even in the Night Vale stories, of which there are now 2, and I'm working on 3 and 4, there's still a little bit of that where you have, it gets compared to like the Thief video game series, which is not a compliment that I resent. I love that because I love that series, but it's actually very distinct morally from Thief, because the Thief series is about Garrett, a guy who is just trying to steal and make a living and retire, and he sort of accidentally does good things. Whereas the main character in the Night Vale series, Xerxes, is basically a hero who is sort of initially in denial about his heroism and is slowly coming to realize that his morality is deeper held than he thought, and that it's incompatible with his life of crime and vocation. And the problems that he finds himself in are really outgrowths of that incompatibility. So that kind of, in a way, could kind of be construed as sort of a little bit of a moral undercurrent. Ghost of the Badlands, I thought I was just going to write sort of a Hellfire and Brimstone, old style, pulpy Western. And as I started writing it, it turned into a analogy for Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. Like, it turned into a straight up treatise. And until I got into after it was done and I read through it, I was like, well, how did this happen? Like, how did it like, I don't remember doing that. It really was kind of a God taking over sort of thing. So I went backward and looked through the epistles at some of what Paul had written and tightened some of it up a little bit more, right? And so that led to me including a D.S. Warner quote at the beginning about the loss of right hand and right eye in order to put yourself away from sin, and all that stuff. And so it wound up being very much like epistle rooted analogy for Paul's conversion, ultimately, to the point where I wound up naming a character Paul, and a saloon wound up being named Damascus, probably a little on the nose, but it really became that. So, but it made itself that. Like, I honestly didn't do that really. A lot of that after the fact was just little tightening and tweaking. It was right there. It was right there, and kind of, I don't know, divine afflatus on some level took over.
Yeah.
I assert that because I had to stop myself from finishing writing the script in one night, which doesn't happen. Like, it just, I literally was over halfway through and I was like, okay, I gotta stop because I'm gonna burn myself out. Like, I don't want the latter half to be worse than the first half. So I'll stop now.
Exactly.
And I'll finish it tomorrow. And I have this trick that I learned from Walter Gibson, writer of The Shadow, that whenever you stop writing, stop in the middle of a sentence. Stop in the
Yes.
middle of this, so that then when you pick up writing, you have to think about what you were acting. You have to put yourself in that headspace. Okay, what was I thinking when I wrote this sentence? How does this need to end? And
Exactly.
and so the next night I picked off, and it was the exact same thing. Like my fingertips couldn't keep up with my brain. So but I was really pleased with how it turned out.
Oh, it's excellent. All of your stuff is excellent stuff, and yeah, you've kind of promulgated the Iron Age media.
Yeah.
You came up with this term, right? Like you were the first one I know of that's used the term Iron Age, I believe.
I have heard that there were people who used it before, but in connection with like this current wave of media, no, I'm pretty sure I was the one who coined it. I had heard that maybe Mark Millar had used it years ago. I had heard that someone else claimed they coined it. If they say they did, I believe them. But
Yeah.
in connection with what I was talking about, the current wave of independent comic books, literature, video games, even independent movies that is coming out, and that is undeniable. Like, you can see a lot of them have been very successful. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was just coined in my video about the Iron Age.
Okay. Well, if I ever have Mark Millar on the channel, I'll just, I'll say he did it. But you're here,
Right.
so you came up with the Iron Age.
Yes.
No, but what you were saying is extremely important, I think, for Christians who are getting into, putting things out, whether it be I put out Pulp Fiction stories myself and everything
Mhm.
else. The last thing we want to do, I believe, as Christians is to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to try to convert people now,
Yeah.
because ultimately that's the Holy Ghost job. It's not ours. But if our faith is inculcated into us and our worldview is inculcated, um, heck, even our influences will come through. I mean, in my pulp noir book, I named the city Chandler City because, well, that's kind of on the nose. I happen to
Right.
like Raymond Chandler.
Right.
One of the officers is Louis Carroll. I wonder where that comes from. You know,
Right.
it's the same thing with the faith. I think the faith, you don't have to press the faith on the story, and I take a very Tolkien-esque kind of view of that, and it sounds like you do too, where
Yeah.
you're not going in there trying to push the message like some people on the opposite end of the political spectrum would do, but you're going in there with this kind of worldview and this foundation that ultimately undergirds what you're doing.
Right. Exactly. And the second volume, which the script for that's been done for a while, we've just been dealing with like getting artists and having artists flake out and stuff like that. So that's what's taking so long on that one. But the second one is the same way. It wound up just having, what I just think there's an element too of the Bible that is transcendent regardless. So if you're raised in the faith, as I was, as you're writing and a transcendent theme or a relatable theme begins to present itself, which should happen naturally if you're doing your job properly anyways, you're certainly not going to be disinclined from drawing the obvious parallel to a Bible story that would be familiar to a large amount of your readership. Everybody knows the story of Noah's Ark, even if they're not Christian. Everyone knows the story of Adam and Eve, even if they're not Christian. It is right. These are transcendent stories. These are transcendent. Everybody knows these. They're cultural. Why do you think every cringy early 2000s action movie reboot had a subtitle of like Armageddon?
Right.
Or Revelation? All right, these are things that everybody's familiar with on some level, even if they don't have a real biblical understanding of them. So I think that's how
Exactly.
it winds up sort of inserting itself without becoming proselytic. Really, that's what I was sort of trying to avoid. But people will still accuse you of it anyways if there's any kind of Christian undercurrent. That's just how that goes.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I think my Pulp Fiction's a little bit more explicit when
Mhm.
it comes to, like, there's like one of the characters, she went to Catholic school when she was younger. She's a
Mhm.
runaway. She's quoting scripture, but you know, it's like you don't it meant something for that character because she's getting into street fights, but yet she's quoting scripture, and you kind
Right.
of deal with that dichotomy of like, okay, here's a street kid who's getting
Oh
into
yeah.
fights
Well,
and
that
following around.
there's some of that in Ghost of the Badlands where you have this zealot, this masked zealot running around quoting scripture and then blowing a guy's brains out. And it's
Right.
like it makes you think. I mean, it definitely has as a sort of touchstone Solomon Kane from Robert E. Howard, where you have this man of violence, but heroism, unmistakably white hat. There's no question what the Ghost of the Badlands is trying to do is morally upright, but there's a zealousness and an unbending violence to it that is clearly at loggerheads with an actual biblical understanding of Christianity. And so what that does, I think, especially with a character whose origin you do not explicitly state, is it makes people wonder. It gets the wheels turning in their head. How did he get that way? What happened to this guy? Like, what in the world? How do you get to the point where you are literally quoting from the book of James and then ventilating some dude's brainstem? Like, how does this happen?
Oh yeah.
And then and any odd thing you can throw in there, from the way that he dresses to the style of firearm to whatever, all of that just gets people thinking. I've Another thing about Ghost of the Badlands was it was like an experiment in almost narrative chiaroscuro, where it was like, how little can I tell the reader and have them finish the thought for me? Like, how
Exactly.
I didn't over explain things. Some of the plot, if you just take it at face value, it might seem to have a plot hole, but I was deliberately doing that to see, okay, does the reader just finish the thought? How little can I say? How little dialogue can there be? How little exposition can there be? And have the plot still make sense? And apparently it still makes sense. So maybe I'll just have like 3 words in the next one. I don't know.
Hey, there you go. There you go. Well, oh, what's your stance on that? Like, how was, because you did a whole video on the Elric versus The Witcher, and I mean, it's clearly plagiarism. And thank you for bringing. I know a lot of people have pointed that out before, but like, where's the line, especially for as a Christian, plagiarism versus inspiration versus I'm going to put a prompt into Chat GPT and let the chat bot write it for me. Like, we're dealing with so much when it comes to the 8th commandment and being honest and everything. Like, what advice would you give to, I don't know, maybe a young guy that's starting out doing this stuff and just kind of discovering this type of Iron Age media and writing? It's like, hey, I may want to do a graphic novel. I may want to write a little pulp novella, whatever. Where does law and gospel fit into that?
Yeah, I would say the line between inspiration and plagiarism is citation. I think you can get alarmingly close to just Xeroxing characters and plots and whatever, and some of the greatest writers and artists and whatever have. They have, like, straight up. As long as you are upfront about the inspiration for doing it. Chandler, when he started writing, was mighty close to what Dashiell Hammett was doing. But Chandler was the first guy to say Dashiell Hammett is a genius. I'm inspired by him and other people. He would also always cite all of his influences. But he was the first guy to say, look, I am taking what Dashiell Hammett has done and I am moving it further. That's all I'm doing here. To me, as long as you're citing, it's okay. That's my issue with Andrzej Sapkowski, the writer of The Witcher, really, is he copied Elric. He copied kind of the whole way magic works, the way the universe works, the way the multiverse works. I mean, he copied a lot of stuff from Elric and then claimed he was a genius who thought of it all himself. And most peculiarly, he was working for a Polish publisher who just happened to be translating Elric into Polish at the time when he came up with the idea.
That really is the smoking gun there.
It's like, come on, dude, come on. So and so consequently, but here's the thing: Elric had all these video games in development for years, and they never got one. Witcher got the video game out first. That's it. That's really what made
what
Witcher
solidified
more
it.
popular in the modern. Yeah, in the modern day. Because I mean, Elric had his heyday. Don't get me wrong. In the like 70s, 80s, whatever, there were a bunch of rock bands who made concept albums about him. They were working on animated movies. They've always been working on movies. Apparently, they have greenlit now a TV series and a video game. There's a TV series and a video game in development, and they are in development. They have gotten over the hump. And it's funny, the last guy who pitched a series to Amazon, I believe, turned it down on the basis that it was too similar to The Witcher. That's where we're at. It's hilarious. So,
Well, I mean, they could just they could update it for the current year and do Elric of Power or something. Put Galadriel in there, it'd be a big crossover multiverse thing.
Yeah,
and they'll completely
camera
screw it
negative.
up.
Yes, camera negative Elric. He'll be black as an oil slick. The Netflix version. Yes. Blacker than Harlem.
Nice. I would pretty much agree with everything you said there. In my mind, I would go back to Tolkien's idea of being sub-creators. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not really creating anything from scratch. We're borrowing things from what God has already created. We're borrowing some of our worldview. We're borrowing a lot of things from around us. No man is an island. So it would be foolish, I think, of anybody to not cite their. I'll be honest with you. If it was a choice between my Ezekiel Creed, Solomon Kane ripoff and someone reading Solomon Kane, I'd say, go read Robert E. Howard's stuff. I mean, are you kidding me? Like that's what I want. I want more people to see, like, this is actually a good way to tell stories, and pulp is a good way to tell stories, because there's
the tough part is when other people have mixed elements that you're inspired by previously. That's one of the things, the thief comparisons to Night Vale. It's because I always wanted to tell a medieval fantasy story about a thief, because I'm a big Robin Hood mark. I love Robin Hood anything. Ever since I saw Prince of Thieves as a kid and played the game and whatever.
No, wait a minute. I'm told that he was a socialist and a communist and whatever else of it. Hollywood tells me that.
I have heard this. He robbed from the rich, and by rich you mean government, and gave to the poor, and by poor you mean taxpayer. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, that's so clearly communist.
Yes, clearly communist, quite clearly. But when you're inspired by Robin Hood and then you mix that with the writing style of Chandler and noir, and you make it a noir, like a street level crime story set in a fantasy world. Like, I was always fascinated with the idea of like watching Return of the King and seeing how detailed the city was and being like, you know what? I don't really care about the War of the Ring. Like, can I just hang out on these streets and like see what happens here? Like, what happens in this town? I wanted like beat cops in Minas Tirith. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted to know what happened. And so I had this really big world that I'd already made. And so I just zoomed way in on one tiny little dot on that map and said, oh, how well would this hold up to scrutiny? And, in terms of the detail and world building that I've already done, I'll just tell a really small story in a really big world. Those are always, to me, contrast is always the best. Big story, small world, small story, big world. Those are always to me, like Blade Runner. Look at Blade Runner. Small story, big world. That's why that movie is so interesting. The one Blade Runner movie that exists, by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's pull on that thread a little bit. Why is there such a degrading of storytelling these days? I mean, the simple answer would be communists are everywhere. That's the simple answer. And I would like to give the benefit of the doubt and say maybe it's not just that communists are everywhere. Maybe it's a lot of different things. Maybe it's I'm
not saying it's communist, but it's communists. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe it's this thing. Maybe it's that. From your perspective, what would be, because we have, I mean, it seems to be across the board, movies, comics, novels. I mean, I can't walk into a bookstore without being bombarded by all these, basically softcore pornography in the what they call romantic section these days. And it's where do you see this? Like, why is there so much deconstruction in storytelling these days?
It's a good question. probably beyond I think you have to look beyond format and look more toward genre, because I think it's deconstruction in a bunch of genres simultaneously. Right? Like it even happened in Westerns. It even happened in watch a superhero movie today. One of the two that are going to be released in the next year, because the genre is actively dying. But why is it dying? Because we've reached the deconstruction phase. We're now, right? We're out of the prime. We're out of the decline phase. Now we're in deconstruction mode. And it's just imploding, right? That's kind of happened to a lot of genres simultaneously. I also think another thing, I just talked about the crime genre. One of the reasons I do film noir archives is because film noir has been hijacked by film nerds. It has been hijacked by the film circuit stooges. It has been hijacked by a bunch of people with wacky socio-political views centered in San Francisco. The crime genre does not belong to wine moms. The crime genre is the purview of the Chandlers and the Hammets. Hammett and Chandler helped. I believe Chandler said it was only going to be a matter of time before American crime writers took the genre native, right? Made it in a way that Americans could relate to. And basically through true crime and the blue-haired, clipped-haired, hipster glasses sort of true crime podcast genre and whatever, I feel like it's been carried far afield. You can see that sort of reenacted across genre. Fantasy, action, even romance, certainly. We don't have sweeping, heartfelt Victorian romances like Wuthering Heights anymore. Like we don't. That doesn't happen. It's strictly fetishist, wish fulfillment, softcore porn now, and it's just led to the whole degradation. And then you factor in that a lot of these companies have been losing money for a long time, especially the traditional publishing houses. Mm-hmm. And you can see this in video games, you can see this in movies, you can see it in whatever. Then all of a sudden they see a bunch of free money sitting on a table. Okay, we're losing money. Here's a bunch of free money. And it comes from a little thing called the DEI or ESG fund.
Exactly.
And oh, hey, you can have this money to fund your project and you'll be less, we know you're risk averse. This will defray any money that you lose. But here's the checklist of things that you've got to have in your story. And most of these publishing houses being based on the coasts, off in the East Coast or off in the West Coast, they're already inclined to propagandize and proselytize in their own way because their sociopolitics are just absolute detritus to begin with. So that doesn't take a whole lot of arm twisting to get them to do that. They're already shrieking lefties in most cases. So it's like, all right, we'll have 20 black lesbians and double amputees in our story for no reason. It was not hard to persuade them to do that. But it really, I think it comes down to a very cynical understanding that we're less risk averse or we're less inclined to suffer a massive, shortfall of funds by releasing this if we take this free money. And again, you've seen that in video games like crazy.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of that's a big part of it too. Like I'm glad you brought that up, the risk aversion, because that seems to be a thing, not just in storytelling, in putting things out there. Mm-hmm. Even in people just like trying to find a church, even it's like, well, I've got to drive an extra 10 minutes to get to this church, even though it's more biblical and stuff like It seems to be a very risk averse, kind of culture we're living in. And I think with recent events, I think that's going to start to change. I'm hoping and praying that people start to wake up more that, this is everything that you do that's worth doing is going to be a fight, and it's going to be an uphill battle for a long time before it actually pays any dividends, if it ever does pay dividends. What's ultimately
and to say nothing of the price that has to be paid along the way. Shoot, what could be more germane to the events of the last week